Night my daughter-in-law slid a piece of paper across the dinner table and said, "Just sign this, Dad. It's to protect you." I should have known. I should have picked up that paper, read every single line, and walked out of that dining room with it tucked under my arm. Instead, I signed it, because she was smiling and my son was nodding and the pot roast was getting cold, and I was 67 years old and tired of feeling like I was always the one making things difficult. That was my first mistake. It wouldn't be my last. My name is Leonard Marsh. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county of Maricopa, Arizona. I built bridges, not the kind people write poems about, the kind that carry school buses and fire trucks and 18-wheelers without flinching. I understood load-bearing capacity, structural integrity, the difference between something that looks solid and something that actually is. And somehow, I missed every warning sign that my own family was about to collapse under me. My wife, Patricia, no, I need to stop. Different story, different names. My wife passed 8 years ago, lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life. The universe has a cruel sense of humor. We had bought our home in Chandler, Arizona in 1991, a 3-bedroom ranch-style house on Mesquite Lane with a big backyard and a lemon tree she planted the first spring we moved in. After she passed, I rattled around in that house alone for 2 years. My son kept saying I should move in with him and his wife. He said it was practical. He said I shouldn't be alone. He said a lot of things. My son is 41 now. He works in sales, medical devices, decent money. His wife, I'll call her what she is, a woman who smiled at me for 3 years before I understood the smile was a calculation, not an affection. They have one daughter, my granddaughter. She's 9, bright as the sun, gap-toothed, obsessed with horses. I'll call her Lily here, though that's not her name. She's the only reason any of this story ends the way it does. I moved into their place in Scottsdale in the spring of 2021. It made sense on paper. I was 65, recently retired, and my knees had started making sounds no knee should make. The house was larger than mine, 4 bedrooms, a casita out back that they converted into what they called Dad's Suite. Separate entrance, small kitchenette, my own bathroom. It felt generous. It felt like family. For the first year, it was fine. I had dinner with them most nights. I drove Lily to her writing lessons on Saturday mornings because my daughter-in-law said she was always running errands and my son worked weekends sometimes. I liked it. I liked the routine, the purpose, the way Lily would talk non-stop about her horse, a grey quarter horse named Biscuit, while I drove, her feet up on the dashboard despite my asking her not to. Some battles you just stop fighting. The paper my daughter-in-law pushed across the table in the fall of 2022 was a financial power of attorney. Limited scope, she said, just for managing household expenses, just to make it easier, she said, since I was on a fixed income now and they were covering so much of the day-to-day. My son nodded along. He had a habit of doing that, nodding along to whatever she said, like his head was on a spring. I signed it. I found out 14 months later what she had done with it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing I noticed was the truck. I had a 2018 Ford F-150, paid off, good condition. One afternoon in January of 2023, my son came to the casita and sat down across from me like he was about to deliver difficult news. He said the truck was too big for me to be driving in the city traffic. He said he'd read about older drivers and reaction times. He actually said that, looking me in the face, and he thought it would be better if I used their second car, a 2020 Honda CR-V, for my local errands. He said he had a buyer for my truck, a friend of a friend who needed a work vehicle. I told him the truck was mine and I drove it fine. He said he understood, but they were worried. I said there was nothing to worry about. He said they felt responsible for me. That phrase stuck in my throat like a bone. Responsible for me. I was a man who had surveyed floodplains and calculated stress coefficients and raised him from a squalling 7-pound infant who once put a Hot Wheel car in the VCR. But sure, they felt responsible for me. The truck was gone by March. He said he got $8,000 for it. He said he put it in a joint account he'd set up for my care expenses. I never saw a statement from that account. When I asked, he said he'd print one out for me. He never did. Looking back, I can trace the pattern like reading a map. Each thing taken was just reasonable enough on its own. The truck, safety concern. My old desktop computer, too slow. He upgraded me to a laptop that, conveniently, he managed the passwords for. My credit card. Let us just handle the household, Dad. You shouldn't have to worry about any of this. He moved me to a small debit card with a $200 weekly limit that he refilled or didn't at his discretion. I was being managed. I just didn't have the word for it yet. Lily noticed before I did that something was wrong with me. Not wrong with the situation, wrong with me. The way you go wrong when you start to believe what's being implied about you. She came to my casita one Saturday morning, ostensibly to show me a drawing she'd made of biscuit, and she sat down on my old recliner that I'd brought from my house, and she said, "Grandpa, why don't you ever go anywhere anymore?" I told her I went places. She said, "Where?" And I sat there for a moment trying to think of somewhere I'd been in the past month that wasn't the grocery store 2 miles away, or the pharmacy. I couldn't. "I go to see Biscuit with you," I said. She looked at me very seriously, the way 9-year-olds do when they've decided to be honest. "That's with me," she said. "Where do you go?" I didn't have an answer, and that scared me more than anything else that had happened. The paper I signed in the fall of 2022, the limited power of attorney, I started thinking about it again in the spring of 2023. I hadn't kept a copy. My son had handled the notarization, said he'd file it, said he'd keep the paperwork organized so I didn't have to. I asked him for a copy in April. He said he'd get it to me. He didn't. I called the county recorder's office myself. It took me 3 separate calls and some patience, but eventually a clerk named, well, she was kind, that's all that matters, pulled up a filing associated with my name and my property address on Mesquite Lane. My house, the one I still owned. The one my wife and I bought in 1991. There was a lien on it. A home equity line of credit opened in November 2022, 1 month after I signed that paper at the dinner table, for $85,000. My name was on it. My signature was on it, notarized and filed. I had never walked into any bank or signed any HELOC paperwork in my life. I had not been present, but my signature was there. My hands were shaking when I hung up the phone. I sat in my recliner and I looked at the lemon tree in the backyard through the casita window. It wasn't my lemon tree, wrong yard, wrong house. But sometimes, in the right light, the neighbor's tree looked like hers. And I thought about what I had built and what was being dismantled and how quietly it was all happening, the way a bridge fails. Not all at once, but in increments, small fractures. Nobody notices until the whole structure gives. I did not tell my son what I had found. That was the smartest decision I'd made in 2 years. I called my neighbor from Mesquite Lane instead. I'd known him for 23 years. He still checked on my house, collected the mail, kept an eye on the property since I'd been renting it out, or thought I had been. He confirmed the tenants I'd arranged were gone. Had been gone since February. Someone had asked them to leave. He didn't know who. The house had been vacant for 2 months. $85,000 drawn against a vacant house I still own, using a signature I didn't knowingly give for that purpose. I needed a lawyer. I needed one before my son realized I knew anything. I found a real estate and elder law attorney in Mesa. Her office was small. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and she did not waste my time. I brought what I had, the county recorder information, the rental history, my original deed from 1991, and my copy of the power of attorney, which I finally managed to get from the recorder's office directly. She read through everything twice, asked me 4 precise questions, and then she set down her glasses and looked at me. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "a limited financial power of attorney for household expenses does not authorize a home equity line of credit on a property you own outright. Whoever used this document to open that account misrepresented its scope to the lender. That is fraud." The words sat in the room between us. I'd built things my whole career. I knew what it meant when the foundation wasn't sound. She filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions that same week. She also sent a certified letter to the lender flagging the unauthorized use of the power of attorney. What happened next, I didn't expect. The bank called me. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law. Me, my cell phone, which I'd quietly gotten a new number for the week before. A prepaid phone I bought at the CVS on Armour School Road because I no longer trusted that my calls on my regular phone were private. The fraud department called to verify my identity and my authorization of the HELOC. They had received my attorney's letter. They needed to speak with me directly. I told them clearly and calmly that I had not authorized any home equity line of credit on my property. I told them I had not been present at any signing. I told them the power of attorney I had signed was limited in scope and had been misused. There was a pause on the line. The bank representative said they would be initiating an investigation and freezing the account pending review. She said she was sorry I was dealing with this. She sounded like she meant it. I thanked her and sat down on the edge of my bed in the casita, and for the first time in about a year, I felt something other than tired. I felt like myself, like Leonard Marsh, who built bridges that didn't fall. My son came to the casita 3 days later. He didn't knock the way he usually did, that casual double tap. He opened the door, they had a key, and he stood in the doorway looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before, something calculating behind the concern. He said the bank had contacted him about an issue with a loan. I looked up from my book. I said, "What loan?" He said there seemed to be some confusion about the HELOC on my house. I said, "I don't know what that is." He watched me for a moment. Then he said they'd sort it out. He said not to worry. He said I shouldn't be making calls to banks directly, that he handled my finances, that I had given him authority to manage things. I said, "The house is in my name. It has always been in my name. If someone opened a loan against it, I'd like to know who authorized that." He left without answering. That night I packed a bag, not everything, just what mattered. My wife's photograph from the nightstand, my original deed and the folder of documents I'd built over the past few weeks, all of it in a waterproof sleeve my attorney had suggested. My phone, my wallet, my medication. I called my neighbour on Mesquite Lane and asked if I could stay for a few days. He said of course, no question, he'd have the guest room ready. Lily found me by the casita door with the bag. She was in her pajamas, the ones with little cacti on them, because even at 9 she was committed to the Arizona aesthetic. She looked at the bag and then at me, and her face did something complicated. "Are you leaving?" she asked. I crouched down, which hurt my knees considerably, and I looked her in the eye. I said, "Just for a little while, sweetheart. I need to take care of some things." She said, "Is it because of Mom and Dad?" Children always know. They know before the adults admit it, before the lawyers get involved, before the bank freezes the account. They already know. I told her it was complicated adult stuff. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her Biscuit was lucky to have her. She put both arms around my neck and hugged me with the particular ferocity of a child who doesn't have the words for what she's feeling. Then she stepped back and looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "I'm going to tell Biscuit you said hi." I drove out in the CRV, which they'd given me use of, and which I had documentation showing they'd offered as a replacement for my truck. I figured they could sort out the car later. I had bigger things to sort out first. The investigation took 4 months. My attorney was thorough. The lender, once they had the full picture, cooperated fully. Lenders do not enjoy being used as instruments of fraud. The notary who had supposedly witnessed my signature on the HELOC paperwork was contacted. Under questioning, that story unraveled faster than a cheap sweater. My daughter-in-law had managed the signing. She presented documents to the notary with a characterization of the situation that was, to put it gently, incomplete. She had used the power of attorney to represent herself as acting on my behalf in a capacity the document explicitly did not authorize. The $85,000 had gone into an account that was eventually traced to a renovation project on a property she and a business partner had been quietly developing. My house was collateral for someone else's investment. My son's role was murkier, and I want to be honest about that because the truth matters more to me than a clean narrative. He claimed he didn't know the specifics of what she had done. I don't know if I believe that. I'm his father, and I've known him for 41 years, and I've watched him nod along to her for 3 of them. And sometimes not knowing is a choice you make because knowing would require you to act. But that was for the courts and the investigators to sort out, not me. What I know is what I can prove. The HELOC was voided. The lien on my house was removed. The funds my daughter-in-law had drawn against my property became the subject of a civil recovery action and a referral to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for criminal fraud charges. My attorney told me the process would take time. Things in the legal system always take time, but the outcome was not in doubt. The deed had always been in my name. Nobody had changed that. Whatever else they'd maneuvered and managed and quietly removed from my life, they hadn't touched the one thing that mattered most. I still owned my home. I moved back to Mesquite Lane in August. My neighbour helped me haul the furniture I'd left in storage. The house needed some attention. The tenants had left a few months earlier and it had sat empty, but nothing serious. A deep clean, a fresh coat of paint in the kitchen. The lemon tree in the backyard had gone a little wild without anyone to prune it, branches reaching in every direction like it had been waiting for permission to grow. I let it. My son called me twice in the first month after the investigation became official. The first time, I answered, he said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known the full extent. He said he felt terrible. I listened to all of it, and then I said, I know you didn't build it, but you watched the foundation crack and you handed them the tools. He didn't have an answer for that. The second call, I let go to voicemail. He said he loved me. I believed that too, actually. I just understood now that love without action is a different thing entirely from love that shows up. I see Lily every other Saturday. Her parents' legal situation didn't change her writing schedule, and she asked, apparently quite firmly, according to my son, that her grandpa still take her to see Biscuit on those mornings. So I pull up to their house at 8:30, and she comes flying out the front door in her boots and her helmet already buckled. And we drive to the stable and she tells me everything I need to know about quarter horses and why Biscuit specifically is the smartest horse at the facility and probably the entire state. She's 9. She's allowed to be certain about things. One Saturday morning, about 2 months after I moved back, she was quiet for most of the drive. Lily is not a quiet child, so I noticed. When we pulled into the stable parking lot, I turned off the engine and we just sat there for a moment. She said, Grandpa, are you okay now? I thought about it honestly. My knees still ached. My house smelled like fresh paint and solitude. There was a civil and potentially criminal process grinding forward that would take probably another year and a half and drain more emotional energy than I had budgeted for. I was 68 years old and I'd learned things about my family that I would have preferred not to know. But the deed was in my name. The lemon tree was growing, and there was a 9-year-old in my passenger seat who had her grandfather's stubbornness and her grandmother's eyes. Yeah, sweetheart, I said, I'm okay. She nodded like she'd already decided that was the right answer and just needed to hear it confirmed. Then she unbuckled her helmet. She'd put it on in the car again, which I'd asked her not to, some battles you just stop fighting, and she pushed open the door and took off across the parking lot toward the stable. I sat there for another minute, watching her go. I built bridges for 31 years. I know the difference between something that looks solid and something that actually is. And I know what it takes to rebuild after a fracture, not ignoring it, not rushing it, but going back to the foundation and checking every single joint until you're certain it will hold. I'm certain now. There's a lemon tree in my backyard that my wife planted the first spring we moved in, and for 2 years, while I was living in someone else's casita, that tree grew wild because nobody was there to tend it. I think about that a lot. How things you built and loved don't disappear just because you stop paying attention. But they do change shape on you. They reach in directions you didn't plan for. And when you come back, you have a choice: cut it all down and start over, or learn to work with what grew in your absence. I chose to work with it. What happened to me wasn't a mystery, not really. I had looked at the people around me and decided that love was enough of a guarantee. I thought because I had given generously, my home, my trust, my signature at a dinner table, that the people receiving those things understood the weight of them. That was my failure of judgment, not of heart. The heart was right to love. The mind needed to stay sharper. There's something nobody tells you about getting older. The world will occasionally test whether you still know who you are. Not cruelly, not always, but the tests come. A paper slid across a table. A truck quietly sold. A debit card with a $200 limit handed to a man who spent 3 decades calculating load-bearing capacity. Each of those moments was asking me the same question. Are you still Leonard Marsh, or have you agreed to become someone smaller? I answered too slowly for a while. I'll own that. But here's what I learned from Lily, of all people, a 9-year-old in cactus pajamas, who asked me where I went when I wasn't with her. Decency isn't just about how you treat people when things are good. It's about whether you can look a child in the eye and tell her the truth without making her carry your fear. It's about walking out of a situation with your dignity intact, even when you're furious, even when you're scared, even when you're carrying a bag with your wife's photograph and a waterproof folder because you no longer trust the people you live with. You can be wronged and still choose how you move through it. And then there's the matter of fighting back, not with anger, but with precision. I didn't blow up at my son when he stood in my doorway talking about the bank. I said I didn't know what he meant, and I let him leave, because I understood by then that the fight wasn't going to happen in that casita. It was going to happen in a lawyer's office, and a lender's fraud department, and a county recorder's filing system. I had spent 31 years learning that the way you defeat a flawed structure is not by yelling at it. You go back to the documentation, you find where the integrity failed, you rebuild from there. That's not something I read somewhere, that's just what it means to keep going when the easier option is to let yourself be diminished. My name was on that deed in 1991, and it was on that deed in 2023, and it will be on it until I decide otherwise. Nobody else's signature changes that. Nobody else's plan for my life supersedes the one I'd built. Lily asked me if I was okay, and I told her yes. I meant it. I'm still Leonard Marsh. I'd build things that hold.